If you have your Bible, turn with me to Romans chapter 1. Romans chapter 1, and I'm going to get to that scripture in just a little while. Okay? I want to remind you, some of you were around in April of 1966, 50 years ago this week. Time magazine published the front cover that you see on the screen there this morning with that headline, "Is God Dead?" And so for today and next Sunday, I want to kind of address a modern answer to that question and pose it a little bit differently. What if? What if God is dead? That magazine cover is one of the most infamous covers in all of history. It's just a very simple, usually Time magazine has pictures and graphics and all kinds of things to grab your attention. That's just simply black with red lettering asking, is God dead? The lead article was actually titled, "Toward a Hidden God." Listen to the lead, the first line of the article. It says, "Is God dead?" It is a question that tantalizes both believers who perhaps secretly fear that he is, and atheists who possibly suspect that the answer is no. So the author of the article is saying believers don't pray because they're afraid he might not be there, and unbelievers, atheists, don't pray because they're afraid he might really be there. So the article is actually addressing the God is dead philosophy of the 1960s. That was the philosophy that was advocated on a lot of campuses, university and college, and publicly adopted by highly regarded philosophers, scientific thinkers, and even theologians of that era. And that philosophy has a long and lasting impact even to today. In recent years, with the writings of well-known scientists and philosophers like Richard Dawkins or Christopher Hitchens or Stephen Hawking and a lot of other like-minded people, the idea of no God, the God is dead idea, has gained a new life. A lot of publication of atheistic books declaring and debating not so much God's existence, but declaring now that there's really no need for a God. We have, as humans, advanced to the point of knowledge and intellect and the ever-increasing knowledge that we have. I mean, if you stop and think about it, how old is Reed today? 7 years old, and he's in second grade, first grade. Reed is studying in first grade probably what most of us studied in 8th grade. The increase in knowledge is just astounding and abounding in our society. And so they're saying there's no need for God, and therefore God doesn't exist. Now that idea, although it periodically gains new life, the idea itself is not new. We find it debated in the Old Testament, and we find it addressed in the New Testament, and that's what our text is going to talk about a little bit in just a minute. And every generation has addressed the issue of the existence of God and the reality of God. And the repercussions of believing there is no God is far-reaching. And as we here at Water's Edge take our new way of thinking that we've emphasized for the last year, and now this year our thinking outside the walls, it is very common, very apparent that we will impact and become acquainted with people who believe there is no God. And even sometimes within our walls, will be people who think there is no God, or people who are going through such a crisis of their faith in even though they have been believers, that they act as if there's no God, or they question, where is God in all of my mess, like Job did? So there's this prevailing attitude, this prevailing question that has been influenced by the God is dead movement throughout our generation. I believe as we go outside our walls, if we as followers of Jesus are going to be able to build relationship with our community, with our neighbors and friends, and those who believe or act as if there is no God, we need to be able to speak to their issues and to speak with understanding. You know how hard it is to speak about something that we know nothing about. Well, at least for most of us. I've run into several people who speak about a lot of things they really don't know about. But we run into that. So the first step, what I want to do today and next Sunday, is to speak and try to discover how the Bible helps us to gain insight into their belief system, and to look for a few minutes today at the origins of the belief and the philosophy that has such a dramatic impact on our world today. So, without getting too academic in this, I hope, let's go back. Let me give you some history. Some history of how we got to the thinking and the philosophy that pervades our society today. The modern, today's life thinking of the God is dead movement, or the there is no God movement, is actually traced back to the 19th century writings of a German philosopher named Friedrich Nietzsche. Now, I may say that name in different ways throughout the sermon, but that's the best way. Nietzsche. Nietzsche's basis of truth was highly influenced by Charles Darwin, the author of The Origin of the Species and the author of the evolutionary scientific thought. Now, I'm going to talk about more of that next week. But the idea of the death of God, Nietzsche published that at least 3 times in essays, philosophical, scientific essays that were published and widely read. The most popular was one called The Madman. In The Madman, Nietzsche describes a man who is searching for God in a public square, and he is laughed at and he is scorned by those in the public square who hear him asking, where is God? And then he declares, the madman says, God is dead. God remains dead. And we have killed him. God has been the victim of murder, and we as human beings are the murderers. The predominant theological thought there is that when Jesus died on the cross, that God died. And there's the rejection of resurrection, and so if we don't believe in resurrection, then God died on the cross, never to come to life again. But Nietzsche, when he's talking about the death of God, he didn't really mean that he believed in an actual God who first existed and then died. Now, to Nietzsche, the concept of a God only exists in the minds of human beings. In other words, if God is a product of our imagination, then we can quit believing in Him if we want to. And we need to just simply hit the delete button and God is dead. Since Nietzsche viewed God as a figment of human imagination, he saw him no longer then as a credible source of absolute moral principle. And herein lies the key of that philosophy that is so very damaging and so very harmful. is not only the rejection of the existence of a heavenly being, but it's the rejection of absolute values of universal moral law. It's the rejection, it's the statement that you've probably heard, there are no absolute truths. And truth is what Jesus is all about. Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. And we hear apologetically the Bible is God's inspired word that tells us the truth about God. Our moral values and morality are the foundation of our belief system about truth as human beings. It's part of the core of humanity. It's who we are. The rejection of values leads to a loss of all religious and moral conscience. Without them, it's easy to come to the conclusion that Nietzsche and so many others today do, that life is meaningless. Now, I need to explain that. Meaningless is not intended in that to communicate a blissness or an emptiness, of depression or suicidal, life is meaningless, and so I'm going to end it all. No, what Nietzsche and the scientific and philosophical meaning behind that is actually called nihilism. It means no restrictions, no truth. It's meaningless to say that there is truth. There is no truth to govern human actions. And so right and wrong only become relative to the situation in which a person finds themselves. Does that not sound familiar? It may be right for you. Right and wrong have no definitive meaning, and so life is meaningless. Now, this nihilistic, meaningless view is, as a Christian, I find that appalling. And I believe to anyone who really thinks about it, who is trying to live a moral, good life, we should find that thought appalling. The question behind the philosophy, though, is how do you define good? A good life in North America does vary a lot from a good life in the Middle East, or in Africa, or in Antarctica, anywhere below. So how do you define good? The philosophy that rejects moral values and moral laws is the very thing that Nietzsche and the modern supporters of this belief say is the ultimate goal. They say we need to get to a point that each individual defines their own values, their own meaning of right and wrong. They would have no God over them. No one telling them what to do, no one telling them what not to do. Does this all sound like our society today? Sound like our culture today? And this is a philosophy of self-indulgence that declares there's nothing inherently evil. It's just relative right and wrong. Now, in our text, I told you I'd get there. In Romans chapter 1, Paul addresses those who in that day were walking away from the belief in God. Now, this was in AD 57. So it was an important topic then. I think it gives an accurate and pointed description of this belief system even today. So Romans chapter 1, and I want to begin reading at verse 18. Paul says, the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who suppress the truth in unrighteousness. Because, now catch this next line, what may be known of God is manifest in them. Say, what may be known of God is made real, made alive. It is shown in them. For God has shown it to them. For since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. Because although they knew God, they did not glorify him as God, nor were thankful. That they became futile in their thoughts, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Professing to be wise, they became fools. Now, I want to break that down a little bit this morning and find the application to where we live in our society today. First of all, Paul is not writing about those who are confused, who are honestly searching for truth. Those who have a strong desire to know there is God and how to live in relationship with him. There are people who have this philosophy. He's not writing to those who have been persuaded by our culture or taken in by the influences of philosophy, literature, science, or music. Paul is writing about those like Nietzsche and others who willfully refuse to acknowledge God. A pattern and a danger of willfully denying God idly is seen within three statements in our text today. First, Paul says they knew God, they suppressed the truth, and professing themselves wise, they became fools. So let's look at each of those pieces and put together the history and the current status of our world today. So look at this. First, they knew God. Now, what is he trying to say there? The phrase, they knew God, in its original hearing. Paul was writing to those who were both Gentiles, Greeks, Romans, the letters addressed to the church at Rome, and Jews who were part of the church at Rome. So this phrase, Paul uses it very deliberately because it has both a Jewish and a Greek or Roman explanation that hits home dramatically to each of those hearing groups. To the Greek and Romans, to the Gentiles. Gentiles, if you remember, are simply a categorical name for everybody that's not Jews. So in the scriptures you have Jews and you have Gentiles. That's everybody else. And so to the Gentiles, this understanding to know God would mean to simply see his creation and recognize his power and authority as the God of creation. The Jewish understanding of to know God held a meaning of not only recognizing the Creator God, but also glorifying and worshiping him. See, it's not enough just to nod in his direction. Say, how beautiful are the mountains. Good job, God. It's not enough. The Jews taught that once a person recognized God's creative power, that then there is an inborn human need to worship him. Paul is writing about people who knew God in that they had affirmed both the reality of God and had worshiped him, yet now were willfully walking away from that knowledge. In verse 28, Paul talks about how they did not like to retain God in their knowledge. Much in today's philosophy, today's cultural thinking, The Bible sets standards of good and evil. And so, in our world, they don't like to retain God in their knowledge because they want this meaningless, this life of self-absorption, self-indulgence. Part of the purpose of Nietzsche's Death of God, he said, was to unmask the hypocrisies and illusion of outworn value systems. He said because of hypocrisy, that God had lost whatever function he once had because of the actions taken by those who believe in him. Now, I want you to understand, Nietzsche was wrong on so many levels, but even a broken clock is right twice a day. And at this point, he had an important word for those who believe in God. Too often, the general population of our culture, and sadly too many professing Christians, live lifestyles as if there were no God. That's called practical atheism. They follow the trends of society's philosophies that change like the direction of the wind and leave behind the core values in which they had previously believed. We see that as a society in so many of our cultural issues today, that the beliefs we held not too many years ago are now discarded, no longer held to. See, I believe it is a dishonorable thing when believers disregard the truth of God which once directed their lives. But what's even more devastating and harmful are the repercussions of those that follow that decision is for everyone around them who they influence. See, as I've studied in prayer, and as I've done research for this today and next Sunday's messages, I've discovered that behind many of the atheists and unbelieving philosophers and scientists and theologians are a heart of a one-time seeker or a one-time believer in God. And the reason for the change for many of them was a major life event wherein they were severely hurt. Sometimes it was an individual who had been emotionally traumatized by the church, or people who claimed to be followers of Jesus yet lived as if there was no God. And that always makes the news headlines. When those who profess to know God deny the power thereof and live as if there is no God. They throw caution to the wind. They violate the children. They violate the sanctity of life. They violate so many of the values of God, yet proclaiming God, they live as a practical atheist as if there is no God. And even in the life of believers, we compartmentalize so often. Yeah, here inside the walls of the church, we believe in God. What a mighty God we serve. But then we live the rest of our week as if there's no God. We don't consult Him on the decisions that we make. We don't pray. We don't read our Bible. The whole litany throughout the week is as if there's no God because we don't consult Him. But then on Sunday morning, hallelujah, praise Jehovah. So in that respect, Nietzsche had a point to say to the church. They knew God. Paul was speaking of it then. It's very relevant today. Secondly, they suppress the truth. Now that has both an outward and an inward meaning. And I believe as we look at this, it has more of an inward meaning than it does an outward meaning. Let me explain. How do they suppress the truth? First of all, and again, I don't want to get too academic with this, but that the statement, there is no God, they are affirming a negative thought. They are stating a negative as a positive affirmation. Let me try to explain that. If I were to say to you that I have been searching my whole life, and I have determined that there is no such thing as a seashell with red and green markings on it. There's no seashell like that. You would naturally think he's gone off his rocker. You would naturally think there's no way anybody can know that with absolute certainty, to say there are no seashells with excuse me, there are no seashells with red and green markings. You would ask, have you searched every beach? Have you searched overseas? Have you surveyed the depths of the ocean? It can't be done. The statement assumes infinite knowledge. And I don't have that, don't you say amen? And nobody does but God. In the same way, to say there is no God assumes that this person who says that has infinite knowledge. So that cannot be asserted with certainty, because it assumes a knowledge, an infinite knowledge that no one has. So to say there's no God suppresses the truth about God. Paul says, because it is naturally born within the human heart and our spirit. Let me help you understand suppressing. We've all been in those situations where something happens that you know it's funny, but it is so out of line to laugh. You've been in a situation like that where somebody says something happens. It happens as a preacher, most of the time it happens at funerals. And you want to laugh. Somebody says something, but here's the grieving widow or widower, and you don't want to laugh, and so you hold it in. And a grin breaks out on your lip, and you're going, but you're holding it in, you're suppressing the laughter, which is natural. You know it's true, you know it's funny, but you've got to hold it in, you've got to suppress it, because I don't want anybody to see me laugh at this poor situation. To suppress the truth is to hold in the truth, even though you want to bust out with it, even though you know. Now, in this, you know truth. They knew God, but they suppressed that. See, in every culture since creation, there has been the inborn knowledge of the need to worship God. The Greek or the Gentile observer of the things made that Paul talks about in the text intuitively know they did not make themselves. And they don't fall into exact order by any cosmic accident. We as humans, we naturally know as truth it has to be a creator. It has to be a first cause, if you will. It has to be God who has set this universe in order. That's what part of what Paul talks about in the text. In verse 20, he says, since the creation of the world, God's invisible attributes, those that were invisible before there was something to be seen, are now clearly seen and being understood by the things that are made. He said, you can see God's attributes by looking at the things He made. And it shows His eternal power and Godhead. That simply means when we look around at creation, the things that are made, we clearly see God's handiwork. It's clearly evident. The things that are made did not make themselves. Every star in the galaxy, every piece of nature, every human life is evidence that there is God. And we know in our spirit there is God. And because if we open our eyes, we see Him at work in every place we look. To deny God, we must suppress the truth by crediting God's work to human ingenuity or cosmic accident. The 15th century philosopher Blaise Pascal talked about that there is a God-shaped vacuum in the heart and the soul of every person, and nothing will fill that void except for God Himself. So they suppressed the truth. Thirdly, professing to be wise, they became fools. Now, words gain new emphasis and meanings as days go by. We know that. And today, the word fool in our ears today is a very hard word, a very hard thing to say. Call somebody a fool and you're likely to lose a friend or get smacked in the face. But the definition and understanding of what Paul is speaking about, what the Scripture talk about, is so very important as we look at this for the inference today. Whereas today, when we think fool, we think of a gesture or an idiot. The actual definition of a fool is a person who acts unwisely or imprudently. That's the Oxford Reference Dictionary. The Holman Bible Dictionary says the exact same thing, a person who acts unwisely or imprudently, but it adds one who leaves God out of decisions. That's the definition of the word a fool. Now, while Nietzsche was certainly very intelligent academically, but under the true definition, he was also very foolish. He left God out of decisions. And I believe the enemy of our soul has given foolish individuals like Nietzsche great power to influence and deceive many people. The consequences, as we have seen, have been horrific. Listen, here's Nietzsche's legacy of influence. Sigmund Freud and Carl Jung, the fathers of modern psychology, adopted Nietzsche as a primary influence in their philosophy. Nietzsche's writings, The Madman and several of the essays that we talked about this morning, became the catalyst for Mein Kampf. That's Adolf Hitler's manifesto of Nazi nationalism, and the primary reason that the Nazis could kill 11 million people, 6 million Jews in the Holocaust, and what most people won't talk about, 3 million Christians. Hitler was a contemporary of Benito Mussolini. They compared notes and shared Nietzsche's writings. Mussolini was a murderous dictator of Italy, and he was responsible for the death of nearly 500,000 of his own Italian citizens. Karl Marx, the father of communism, was a follower of Nietzsche. Karl Marx trained up Joseph Stalin. Stalin, whose evil reign as Russian dictator resulted in the deaths of an estimated 33 million of his own Russian citizens. Because life is meaningless. There's nothing inherently evil. See, the influence of these men and those whom they have influenced has impacted and continues to have impact in our world today in ways far beyond our ability to discern. Today, those who were students of the God is Dead movement in the 1960s are now the university professors teaching the next and new generation a godless philosophy. Allow me to go down a little side road here, because I understand most, we're not sitting in university today. The influence of Nietzsche and his followers has not only saturated our society from college campuses, but in many ways, and sometimes in more ways, in the music of our society. Scottish politician Andrew Fletcher said, "Let me write the songs of a nation, and I don't care who writes its laws." It's impossible to deny that songs have a dramatic influence on us and on our society as a whole. Music has been the catalyst for inspiring men to march to war. It inspires love, devotion, and patriotism. The music of a nation has influences and its philosophy of truth in every generation. Let me give you just one example. In 1971, 45 years ago, John Lennon of the Beatles fame wrote the song Imagine. And I have to give credit. That's one of the most beautiful tunes I've ever heard. It is absolutely wonderful tune. But have you ever stopped and really listened to the words? Here's the first line. Imagine there's no heaven. It's easy if you try. No hell below us, above us, only sky. Imagine all the people living for today because life is meaningless. So you just what's relative for all the people living for today. Imagine there's no countries. It isn't hard to do. Nothing to kill or die for, and no religion to. 45 years ago. Is that song still? That was at the height of the God is Dead movement, kind of became an anthem for them. But back then, what about now? Okay? Let's bring this song up to date. It is one of the most performed songs in the world last year. Countless numbers of singers in homage to Lennon and the song's ideal have recorded it and performed it at concert after concert after concert. Did you watch the New York Times ball drop on New Year's Eve? If you listened behind all the shouting and the hysteria of watching the ball drop, for the last over 20 years, they have played Imagine as the ball drops. Their hope for the new year. No heaven, no hell. Living for this moment, living for today, no religion. See, it is the end, and if this one song has that much influence, and we understand that there is a list of godless themed songs that grows every day, influencing generation after generation to live without God. And let me say, it's not just the music of the young people today. If I want to really hurt your feelings, I can name you some country songs, I can name you some classical songs, I can name you some a Frank Sinatra song. I can point out every genre that has godless themes to their songs. They say, live only for today, eat, drink, and be merry, tomorrow we die. Now, I want to give you the flip side. There's always two sides to a coin in there. Let me give you the flip side of Nietzsche's legacy. He first wrote The Death of God in 1882. 7 years later, at 44 years old, he suffered a total mental collapse, and his insanity could not be treated or cured, and he died 11 years later, totally insane, secluded in a lonely bedroom under the care of his mother. He died void of his mental faculties that had been so celebrated, void of hope, reaping the seeds of meaningless that he had sown. Karl Marx died, he wanted to rule the world. He died with no nation willing to claim his body. And about 10 people attended his funeral. Mussolini was executed by his own citizens. Hitler committed suicide. John Lennon was murdered by a man who said that Lennon's hypocrisy, remember we talked about the hypocrisy of the church? David Chapman said that Lennon's hypocrisy, he said, quote, Lennon told us to imagine no possessions. And there he was with millions of dollars and yachts and farms and country estates, laughing at people like me who had believed the lies and bought the records and built a big part of their lives around his music. Marx, Stalin, Mussolini, Hitler, Lenin, all devoted followers of Nietzsche philosophy, and met with a terrible end. Now hear Paul's words again, professing themselves to be wise. They became fools in the truest definition of the word. I believe the apostles' words are just as relevant for us today as it was for the church then. We must have ears to hear what the philosophies of our society are saying to us. We must listen carefully to the messages being delivered to our mind and heart through the culture in which we live, what's being taught in our schools, what's being promoted in the television programs we watch, what's being promoted in the advertising, the numbers of books that are published, the books that you read, all of this influence. We've got to be aware and informed, and that's part of the purpose of this message this morning, is to equip us to understand and hear more clearly what is the world, what the society is saying to even the church. God is not dead. We've just celebrated Easter, where we affirm afresh Jesus is alive. The philosophers and science and theologians might scoff at us. The society in which we live may think us off the mark, but know this. In the search for life's meaning, if you honestly search, you do not suppress the truth, you will find the true God of heaven. And I believe because one time I heard his still small voice. See, in the 1970s, I bought into the philosophy for a while. And one night I heard his voice speaking to my spirit. Not audibly, but my spirit. I sensed, I heard him say, God, you've been searching so long. And I know you're tired. Welcome home. Welcome home. I know that this has been longer than what I usually do on Sunday mornings. I hope you'll stick with me. I'm going to stop right here. This is not a series of sermons. This is one long sermon that I will stop now and finish next Sunday. So come back next Sunday to hear the end of it. But I want to stop right here for a minute. I want us to think for just a minute. I believe the Holy Spirit of God might be working in some of our hearts right now. And when He's at work, we don't need to wait until next week. I know sometimes we really just need God to make it real. And maybe today this message is not so much about the people outside our walls that we would come in contact with as it is maybe about some of us sitting here today. Maybe you've had so many doubts that have caused you to disbelieve. I want you to know that life does have meaning. Though the world might say God is dead, I believe God is. And He will make it real for everyone who honestly searches, does not suppress the truth. He'll make it real.
Hi, this is Pastor Don from Water's Edge Church here in Cape Coral. Thank you for checking out our new YouTube channel. I hope you'll check back every week for the latest services from our sanctuary here at 2213 Country Club Boulevard. I appreciate you watching the video, but we'd also love to meet you. We gather every Sunday morning at 10:30 a.m. for a time of inspirational worship and Bible preaching. If you want more information, check out our website at mywatersedgechurch.com or find us on Facebook at My Water's Edge Church. I hope to meet you in person sometime. God bless you. Thank you again for watching.